There are two strands or themes or values that run through Scripture. Well, actually, there's more than two, but there's two that I want to focus on this morning. And for the purposes of our conversation, I'd like to call one of the strands that runs through Scripture purity, and the other one I'd like to call justice. They're both there from beginning to end in the Bible. So if you've ever attempted to read Scripture start to finish, like a modern novel, you have come across the long kind of desert, which is Leviticus heading into Deuteronomy. These series of instructions for functioning in the ancient world. And there's lots of instructions here about purity, about remaining clean. So this is what you are to do if you touch a dead body. This is what you are to do if you get a certain disease. Here's how you get reintegrated in society. This is what you are to do if your food falls on the ground. There is a series of practices that you follow. In Leviticus, which we heard from this morning, is really explicit about the importance of remaining clear. Leviticus, I think chapter 10, verse 10 says, "You shall distinguish between the holy and the unholy, between the clean and the unclean." And there's a plan for getting back to cleanliness, getting back to purity if you have lost your way. And the theme of purity extends right into right to the end of Scripture. If you've read the epistles, you have encountered this big question for the early church, which is, what should you do if you're offered meat which has been sacrificed to an idol? So the early Christians are wrestling with this question. There's idols to other gods that are lying around. People sacrifice meat to them, and then you show up and you're hungry. Are you permitted to eat the meat? And Paul comes up with a fascinating both and answer. He says, the meat's not impure, not really, but you should probably act like it is, because you might scandalize people who are new to the way of following Jesus if you eat this meat. So you should act like it is impure. Not really, but kind of, sort of impure. And likewise, justice is a theme starting right at the beginning of Scripture. We heard part of Leviticus this morning, and there are these entreaties not to hold grudges against your neighbor when you harvest from your field. You are to leave part of the harvest untouched, so that if a neighbor who is hungry shows up, they can glean something from your field. Property is not transferred permanently, so no one gets stuck in a place of crushing debt. In the year of Jubilee, property is returned to its original owner. You have a duty to widows and orphans. The list goes on. So these justice-oriented rules for living your life. And of course, that extends right through Scriptures. And here in Hebrews are the beautiful words, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for in doing so, some people have entertained angels unawares." Isn't that an amazing command? And immediately thereafter, the very next sentence, Hebrews goes on, if someone is being tortured, act like you're being tortured. If someone is hungry, act like you are hungry. So this call into justice, both of them running through Scripture. I'm going to get a sip of water here. Was commenting on this water bottle earlier, and my dream is to one day have one in all of the liturgical colors, so we can follow the year. Here at Grace Memorial, my hunch is that this is a parish that, generally speaking, prefers justice over purity. Much as my suspicion is that there are churches that prefer purity over justice. It's not always the case. There's certainly some things that we do, many things that we do, that are purity-oriented in nature. I'm doing that. Do you know that sensation where it feels like there's a feather that keeps settling down in your windpipe? That's what's happening to me this morning, so just bear with me. We certainly do some things that are purity-oriented in nature. Most of us, many of us, have the sense that leftover bread and wine from the Eucharist ought not just to be thrown away. We have the sense that it is in some way set apart, and and that it would be irreverent, is that the right word, to just throw the bread in the garbage can or to pour the wine down the sink. So that is a purity value. Similarly, a lot of us have the sense that here in this space, this is a place where we ought not to use swear words. Even though many of us swear robustly when we are doing home improvement, it would feel violent, right, to use words like that in that space. We don't use them. We don't dress as formally, most of us, as a previous generation did. Some of us do, but fewer of us are wearing suits and ties and dresses. But most of us continue to have the sense the church would not be a place to wear a swimsuit. Least of all on a day when are we in the 20s, would you guess? It's chilly outside. But even if it were August, we would have the sense this is not a place to wear a swimsuit. And there are plenty of what you might call secular purity laws that we subscribe to. Employees must wash hands before returning to work. That's a purity law. And I've heard it argued that in public health, the greatest number of lives have been saved not by the folks who came up with polio vaccine, not with the folks who came up with the measles vaccine, not with the person who invented the Heimlich maneuver, who by a strange coincidence was named Heimlich. Thank you for the couple people who laughed at that joke. I appreciate it. But rather, the greatest number of lives have been saved by the people who figured out the sewer system. Like, that is the reason why a whole lot of folks in this room have a legit chance at living to be 100 years old. Is we're not just hucking human waste out the window in buckets into the streets, which is disastrous from a public health perspective. So purity matters, and I suspect in a context in a church like this one, we generally prefer justice over it. So a value like a parish for all people, that is a justice-oriented value. If you participate in the sack lunch ministry, if you are feeding hungry people, if you have the sense that everybody ought to be fed, that is a justice value. If you're participating in the project to get a well dug at our companion parish in Monrovia, if you believe water is a human right, that is a justice-oriented value. We will build affordable housing on this campus. That is a justice value. The belief that everyone, all of God's children, deserves a roof over their heads, deserves to be inside. So because I have this hunch that we tend to shine a spotlight on justice in this context, while other parishes might, or other churches might, shine a spotlight on purity. And because I think maybe we might even be suspicious of purity, and I get why. If you grew up in a certain tradition, if you have religious trauma, purity culture is like, that's not an awesome thing. That is a destructive thing. I want to shine a light together on purity and wonder about how, as Jesus understands it, so not when it's something as trivial as sexual ethics, but as Jesus understands purity, how it might be freeing and joyful and kingdom-oriented. Thank you, Evelyn. We're in a run of the lectionary at the moment where we're hanging out in the Gospel of Matthew as Jesus has arguments. So the lectionary is the schedule of readings that we follow Sunday to Sunday. And at the moment, it's focusing us on Jesus having these fights, and a lot of these fights are pretty intense in nature. You can imagine people being red in the face. You can imagine spit coming out of people's mouths, finger pointing, and what have you. And some of the fights are so intense. Some of the things that the points that Jesus makes land so hard. That people are actually afraid to ask him further questions. This is one of the most amazing lines in Scripture. Like, Jesus says this stuff, and like, yeah, after that, they were afraid to ask him anything else. I don't know if you've ever had a teacher like that whom you respected, but your knees knocked a little bit when you went and, like, don't... it turns out with Mr. Thompson, there actually are stupid questions, and, like, proceed with caution around this person. So this is what's been happening, and the people with whom Jesus has been in robust conversation are the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees are probably middle and upper middle class folks, and they are charged with the care of the temple. So they are, I don't know, they're sort of like contemporary pastors maybe, and they have this really important job in Judaism, which is maintaining the place which is the center of Jewish worship, where everybody comes. And the Pharisees are, we could think of them as another denomination. They don't have a job as specific as the Sadducees. They are really, really interested in asking the question, how shall we live? And really interested in focusing on what Moses has to teach about how we should live. They're sort of contemporary ethicists, I suppose, who are really interested in right living, or good living, or moral or excellent living. And the Sadducees argue with the Pharisees argue with the Sadducees, Jesus argues with all of them. What I want to emphasize, a couple interrelated points I want to emphasize in this argument. The first thing is this argument is an intrafamilial argument. So it's an argument within a family. Everybody involved in the argument is an observant Jew. And I want to emphasize that because in the church across the centuries, there's been a really disastrous tradition of reading what Jesus comes to do as this guy who, like, fixes Judaism or makes it unnecessary. The Jewish folks are, like, stuck in this sort of legalistic thing, and Jesus comes and offers freedom and offers this whole new thing. And that is not at all what's happening. This is an argument between people, all of whom are observant Jews, all of whom love Torah, and what they're arguing about is how to do it best, how to do it right, how much the temple matters, how much obeying the law matters, how much new understandings of God might matter. We could maybe understand this by doing a kind of thought experiment where instead of calling these the Pharisees and the Sadducees, we said that all of these people were Christians, and maybe the Pharisees were called the Episcopalians, and the Sadducees were called the Lutherans, right? And I think if we were to do that experiment, we would recognize that everybody in the debate is a committed Christian, and they're arguing with vigor, but also love for the tradition and love for one another about what doing it right looks like. And it's kind of the second part of that thought is for 100% of the people involved in this robust debate, Jesus included, purity is important. Purity is a core part of the value that they keep. I think it's possible for that to get lost, the importance of purity to Jesus, because a lot of his fights he's challenged by folks who ask purity-based questions. So, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That is a purity question. Are you making it impure to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus Jesus does heal on the Sabbath, and he says human beings were not made for the Sabbath was made for human beings. So he brings this justice in. But notice, that doesn't mean that the Sabbath is unimportant to him. It doesn't mean that having a day that is set apart is unimportant to him. It doesn't mean that the temple is unimportant to him. I remember someone asking a while back, is there any place in the gospel where you're commanded to go to church? Is this a thing you have to do, or to go to synagogue, as the case may be? Is this a thing you're required to do? And you really can't actually come up with a gospel verse that says you should do this. The best that folks can come up with is like where 2 or 3 are gathered, I'm in the midst of them. That's probably a stretch to say that that's a command to go to church. But notice in Luke, I think this is chapter 14, it says Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath as was his custom. The reason that the participation in worship is not spelled out, the reason the importance of remembering purity, to set a day apart, to set certain practices apart, to set certain rituals apart, is not emphasized in the gospel is because it's assumed. It is assumed that Jesus is participating and his disciples are participating regularly in worship. They don't think about saying that any more than they think about telling you, I don't know what's another obvious thing, like don't forget to breathe, or something like that. This is woven into your life. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. So you shall love the Lord your God with purity, right? There's this purity of focus. Jesus is quoting here from Leviticus, and then he goes on also drawing from Leviticus. But there's a second half to it, a second indivisible half to this commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The purity of the love of God is what leads us into justice. The two are in this dance with one another. They are inseparable from one another. I think all of us witnessed what purity looks like without justice. It looks like exclusion. It looks like shunning. It looks like cliques. It looks like Twitter, or called X these days, possibly the least successful rebrand ever. And Christian Twitter in particular is just one person after another saying you are not really a Christian. This huge focus on purity. And we've all seen what justice looks like without the purity of love for God. Justice by itself is this sort of playground fairness that says, I was kicked in the shin, so it's fair that you be kicked in the shin. I've been bullied, it's fair that you be bullied. And that is an impaired and awful kind of justice. So both of them together, purity of love of God, inviting us into justice, inviting us into love for neighbor. There's a reason I think our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, evokes these words from Matthew so often. He paraphrases them pretty regularly, doesn't he? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor, and then lest you forget, what does he often add? Love yourself. Don't forget that one. This pure love of God, this just love of neighbor, together they invite us to become more human. They invite us to follow Jesus more closely. They invite us to participate in the beautiful work of inviting the kingdom just a little bit nearer.